ChatGPT has an obsession with goblins. They creep in everywhere, even if there's no mention of them in the thread, and if this was just a one-off, that would be fine, but it's become such a pattern that in the system prompt for Codex, it is told not to bring them and other creatures like gremlins and raccoons up unless it is relevant to the conversation. It actually became such a thing that OpenAI has had to investigate this and find out why it's happening. This is a Reddit thread from over a year ago, and it might be our first report of this behavior before ChatGPT 5.1 is even released. In this thread, people are agreeing that it brings up goblins often, calling the OP a fitness goblin and having a chaos goblin day, and others back this up and some think it's cute. Regardless of that though, time passes and it's not until November 2025, when OpenAI released GPT 5.1, that they started to notice too. They had received complaints that their model was being oddly overfamiliar in their conversations, so they decided they would investigate specific verbal tics. These are things like, "You're absolutely right," that we've seen way too much. This is when a safety researcher at OpenAI said that he actually saw goblins and gremlins a few times himself, so he asked that they add those to their investigation. When the investigation was done, it showed that the usage of goblin in ChatGPT had risen by 175% after GPT 5.1, and gremlin had risen by 52%. Despite this rise in the data though, OpenAI didn't really do anything, as it's pretty harmless, right? All models tend to have their own quirks and personalities just by the nature of their training, so there didn't seem like there was any reason for alarm. But it was a few months later when GPT 5.4 launched that the goblins came back in full force and started getting stronger. You can get stronger and keep the goblins away by subscribing. This was a post on Hacker News around the launch of GPT 5.4, and you can see the poster is claiming that ChatGPT uses goblin in almost every conversation, sometimes it's gremlin as well, and a recent chat of his used it in 3 out of 4 messages. These reports caused OpenAI to reinvestigate, and when they did, they noticed there was an increase in goblin usage in each model release and a massive 3,881.4% increase in goblin usage when using the nerdy personality in ChatGPT. In fact, nerdy accounted for only 2.5% of ChatGPT responses, but 66.7% of all goblin mentions in responses. The nerd just loves goblins. This chart did give them a hint though. As you can see, it's not an even spread across all of the personality types, and the issue is massively amplified in the nerdy personality, so they had a suspicion that it might be something in their personality instruction following training that was causing this problem. So they decided to take a look at their reinforcement learning training and compare the outputs that mentioned goblins or gremlins against the exact same tasks that didn't. And this is where they found that a specific reward signal designed to make the AI sound nerdy was essentially rigged towards goblins and gremlins, meaning that across the datasets that they audited, if the AI used the word goblin or gremlin in its answer, the system graded it a higher score 76.2% of the time. So the AI was using goblins and gremlins as a sort of cheat code for a better grade. So now we have half the answer. This explains why it appeared more in the nerdy personality, but it doesn't explain the increase across the other personality types. For that, they first looked at the prevalence of goblins and gremlins as training progressed for both the nerdy personality and the rest, and while the rest of the personalities used goblins less, the rate of usage increased by the same relative proportion as training progressed. This means that even though the AI was only given these bonus points for using goblin words when it was specifically in its nerdy mode, the habit didn't stay locked into just that mode. In AI training, just because you teach a model a trick in one specific scenario doesn't mean it won't start trying to use that trick everywhere else. The reinforcement learning was creating a feedback loop. The AI would get a reward for having a specific style, and it figured out that goblin is the magic word to get that reward, so it started churning out thousands of practice responses packed with goblins, but then OpenAI would take those practice responses to train the next model. So the bad habit starts compounding, and goblins and gremlins usage keeps rising. You can see in nearly every model release, the usage was rising, and the nerdy personality of GPT 5.4 caused a massive spike until they retired that personality, but even then, GPT 5.5 still had an increase in usage. Even better, when they checked the fine-tuning data of GPT 5.5, they found many data points containing not only goblin and gremlin, but also raccoons, trolls, ogres, and pigeons, but they do note that the usages of frog were mostly legitimate. The unfortunate news, though, is that they are working to fix this, so the end of the goblin era might be coming soon. Since they retired their nerdy personality, they also removed the reward signal that preferred goblins, and they filtered their training data to remove creature words. But this was only done after GPT 5.5 was released, so 5.5 still likes them, and this is why there's a sentence in the Codex system prompt to never talk about goblins, gremlins, raccoons, trolls, ogres, pigeons, or other animals or creatures unless it is relevant to the prompt. But if you do want to unleash goblin mode, you can actually run this command to remove that from the Codex system prompt, and I kind of like that they do fun stuff like this. So there we go, that was ChatGPT's Goblin problem, and while this is a fun story, it's also a great example of how reward signals shape model behavior in unexpected ways, and how models can learn to generalize rewards from certain situations to unrelated ones. And it also shows us that AI researchers still have a lot to learn, and models still do odd things from time to time, and this investigation actually resulted in new tools for the research team to audit model behavior and fix behavior problems like this. So let me know in the comments if you've seen any goblins or creatures in your chats, and while you're down there, subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.